Right now, behind the sun, a traveller from another star moves through our sky. Astronomers call it Three-Eye Atlas, only the third interstellar visitor we have ever seen. In late October 2025, it will brush past the sun at about 1.4 astronomical units. Then it will leave us forever. Already it has done something unusual. It began breathing water far from the heat, like a quiet fountain in deep cold. Tonight, we will drift through 200 gentle facts, dates, distances, and simple clues. We will say what it is not, and why this brief passing matters. Settle in. Slow your breathing. Let the night carry you as Three Atlas writes a single line across our part of the universe. Close your eyes. Picture a quiet control room at the edge of the Andes. It is just past midnight. Cold air on the dome, screens glowing a soft blue. The Atlas telescope in Chile is sweeping the same patch of sky it has swept 1,000 times before. On one screen, 4 frames line up like breaths. Frame 1, pause. Frame 2, pause. Frame 3, frame 4. A faint point moves when everything else stays still. Not much, just enough to make a human lean closer and make the software whisper, "Look again." Astronomers follow rules that help them stay calm. When you think you have something, you do not shout. You measure. You compare. You send a note to a quiet place on the internet called the Near-Earth Object Confirmation page. If the world is a library, that page is the desk lamp where new things are laid down with care. The object is logged. Coordinates, brightness, timestamps. Candidate, they write. Not a comet yet. Not an interstellar visitor. Just a moving dot. Hours pass. Another observatory checks. Then a third. The little dot is real. It is not a smudge. It is not a ghost in the camera. It is travelling on a path that does not curve like the paths we know. Now the language changes. Numbers arrive that mean more than they seem. Eccentricity well above 1. That is the quiet way to say, this path will not close. It will not circle the sun and return. It will dive in and slip away. Astronomers breathe out. They have seen this only twice before in human history. Oumuamua in 2017. Borisov in 2019. 2 travellers from other stars, now a third. The name forms in 3 steps. First the survey tag, because Atlas found it. Then the comet-style name C20C25N1, Atlas, which is a filing system for when and how it was seen, and then the special mark, through eye, Atlas. Third interstellar, a small line of text that means a very large thing. Later people will talk about speed. They will say inbound velocity at infinity, which is a way to imagine the speed before the sun's gravity pulls. You can think of it as 58 to 61 kilometres each second. Try not to feel the number. Feel the picture. Every second, a slice of Earth the size of a small country. Every minute, the width of an ocean. Enough to cross your nighttime sky in a single careful breath. If only it were bright enough to see. Before the name was official, a hunt began through old images. This is called pre-covery. Astronomers opened drawers of sky photographs from nights and months before, looking for the same faint dot where it should have been. There it is, barely there, on ZTF frames from June. There it is again, a thread you would miss if no one traced it with a pencil. Each rediscovered dot tightens the orbit and lowers the doubt. The storyline sharpens. The path through the solar system becomes a narrow ribbon instead of a smudge. The first descriptions are modest. Cometary appearance. A whisper of a coma around the nucleus. A tale that obeys the old rule, away from the sun. No drama in the language. Just the sturdy words of people who do not want to promise more than the light permits. But even in these early days, something is already unusual. Evidence of water seen through its child shows up when the visitor is still far from warmth. Most comets wait. They wait closer in, when sunlight can do the work. This one begins to breathe in the cold, not a roar, a steady fountain, tens of kilograms each second, as if the coma were full of icy grains that carry their own small reserves. Pause here. Listen to the room. Clocks tick, a keyboard clicks. Outside, the stars drift. Inside, numbers settle into place. Discovery time, right ascension, declination, magnitude, uncertainty. Nothing about this is loud, and yet it is a once-only event for our species. An object that formed in another star's nursery is now in our sunlight, visible to our instruments, answerable to our questions. Interstellar, we say, and the word can sound like a shout. Let it be a lullaby instead. Interstellar means not bound. It means the arc of this traveller is open like a question mark. It means there is no return ticket in the mathematics. Someone asks the old question, could it be dangerous? You can answer softly and clearly, no. Its closest distance to Earth will be far, about 1.8 astronomical units. That is more than 270 million kilometres, a safe distance, a quiet flyby, a slow ballet we will watch from the back row of the theatre. Another question. How big is the heart of it, the nucleus inside the haze? Early images from Hubble and big ground telescopes give limits, not certainties. Small, a few kilometres at most, and likely less. That is how this kind of knowledge begins, with a fence built from light and a sign that says, inside here it must be smaller than this. The paperwork catches up to the joy. The Minor Planet Centre publishes circulars. Observatories reserve time. Teams write brief notes and polite emails. We observed the target. The spectrum shows. Around the world, in many time zones, a chain of very human work begins. Calibrate, subtract, stack, and check. People drink tea, people rub their eyes, people share a small smile with the person in the next chair. Step back and see the larger picture. In the year 2025, at the soft edge of winter and summer depending on your hemisphere, a faint stranger is logged, checked, and named. Its path is hyperbolic, its speed is unbound, its breath carries water earlier than expected, its tail is true to the old geometry, its size is modest, its danger is none. That is enough to open a story without shouting. That is enough to begin a long night's journey. Now imagine the path from the first frames to the first theories. Theories arrive like clouds. Some are bright and light, some are heavy and dramatic. We do not need them yet. Chapter 1 is a table being set by careful hands. 4 images that lined up, a moving dot that would not quit, a line of numbers that refuse to close, a name that tells the truth, 3i Atlas. Third, interstellar, found by a watchful survey that was built to see dangerous things and instead saw a wondrous one. Think about what once only means. This visitor will never come back by itself. The sun will warm it for a time. We will watch it draw near to perihelion, closer to the sun than Mars, farther than Earth. Then watch it fade again, out toward the dark between stars. We will have this brief chance to learn, to measure the gases that whisper from its surface, to estimate the dust that lifts and falls, to test ideas about how worlds form in other nurseries. For tonight, we keep the field of view small. We stay with the first light and the first name. We stay with the people in that Chilean dome and with the ones who answered them from thousands of kilometres away. We honour the quiet discipline that makes discovery possible. Look, confirm, share, and only then begin to speak. Breathe in, breathe out. Let the facts settle like snow. It was first noticed on the night of July 1st, 2025 by the Atlas survey in Chile. Within days its path proved hyperbolic, open, not bound. its speed arriving from deep space is on the order of 60 kilometers each second. Pre-covery images from earlier weeks stitched its trail and sharpened the orbit. Its official names are both true at once: C2025 N1 Atlas and 3I Atlas, the Comet code and the interstellar rank. Early observations showed a real coma and a sun-facing tail that obeys the rule of light and dust. Water's fingerprint, seen as OH, appeared while it was still far from the sun, as if icy grains were already venting. Its nucleus, hidden in the glow, is small, likely a few kilometers across, probably less. Its pass is safe, closest to Earth around 1.8 astronomical units. And its visit is unique. One swing by the sun, and then the long goodbye. Let each line be enough. Let them fold over you, soft and steady. In the next chapter, we will widen the frame. We will trace the geometry of its path, perihelion, dates, distances, and we will do it the same way we began tonight, gently, clearly, and without hurry. Think of a chalk line drawn on black stone, faint as breath, patient as tide. That is the path of 3 Atlas through our neighbourhood, a single open sweep that enters from the dim outskirts, leans toward the sun, and then does not circle back, only continues on, unbound. The old words for this motion are soft when spoken slowly. Perihelion for the nearest touch, eccentricity for how open the curve is, inclination for the tilt against the plane of our planets. And each of those words is less a command than a lullaby, a way to rock the mind into understanding. Perihelion, for this traveller arrives near the end of October, not skimming our orbit but passing the sun at about 1.4 astronomical units, which is farther than Earth and closer than Mars, a warm hallway rather than a furnace. And from that gentlest bow the curve opens outward again into the star-flecked dark. Our home never lies on the line, and even at the moment of closest approach to Earth, deep in December, it keeps a courteous distance of about 1.8 astronomical units, hundreds of millions of kilometers, a softness of space so wide that no sound could cross it, and no worry needs to. The numbers can feel hard when they sit alone, but they soften if you hold them in your mouth and say them the way a bedtime reader would. 1.4 for the sun touch, 1.8 for our far hello. The units themselves a steady rhythm, astronomical unit, the span from Earth to sun, the heartbeat yardstick of our sky. Between now and that December distance there is a brief theatre trick the heavens play. The sun steps onto the stage between us and the visitor. The curtain of glare drops, and the instruments must wait a little. A solar conjunction, like closing your eyes on purpose so that opening them again can feel like seeing for the first time. And when the view returns, the same gentle rules appear as they always do, because light and dust and gravity are old, dependable storytellers. Tales point away from the sun because sunlight pushes the smallest grains like a slow wind. The coma swells as the nucleus warms and sheds vapour and snow dust, and the path seems to bend in ways that do not belong to the comet at all, but to us, because we are walking along our own track while we watch, and parallax paints a slow arc across our inner eye. If you relax, you can feel the geometry in your breathing, the approach that barely quickens the pulse, the turn that is not a corner but a soft rounding, the outward drift that lengthens into silence, and all of it drawn not by decision, but by the arithmetic of open orbits, where eccentricity lives well above one, meaning the curve cannot close no matter how long we follow it. Heat falls with distance like falling snowflakes in reverse, thinner and thinner as the numbers grow, and yet at 1.4 astronomical units. There is enough warmth to lift more gas and dust, to let jets switch on and off in murmurs rather than roars, to let the coma change its texture the way frost changes as dawn reaches it. but even that awakening cannot change the big shape. Once the path is open, it stays open, a long sigh through our garden and out. If you were standing in a dark field and could slow time to a patient drip, you would not see a dramatic slingshot, only a months-long bow, the visitor writing a pale sentence along the ecliptic while our planet steps through its own punctuation marks, and the sense of motion you feel would be a duet, part the comet, part the Earth, part the sun, drawing lines between both. We sometimes speak of speeds and vectors as if they were sharp things, but here they become quilt stitches holding the sky together. 50-something kilometres each second measured far from the sun's pull, a little more inside our well of light, then a little less as the climb begins again, and beneath those numbers a gentler music. Gravity transforming straight intentions into arcs, then loosening its hold as distance grows. The map of where and when is simple enough to hold in a sleepy mind. Late October, the sun touch at 1.4, mid-December, the shy distance at 1.8, the days around conjunction when we listen rather than look, and the feelings attached to those dates are simple too. Curiosity in October, patience in November, quiet awe in December, when the visitor is closest and still unimaginably far, safe as a ship beyond the horizon. We might be tempted to imagine steering, the way old sailors spoke of trimming sails at closest pass, but the truth is kinder and calmer. On scales of kilometres and days, tiny jets can nudge a nucleus, but on scales of months and millions of kilometres the great curve barely notices. And so, the geometry remains our friend, a promise written in light that the path will not fold back on us. And if you need something you can picture with your hands, trace a spoon in the air, start in the far room where the air is cold, slide down the handle toward the warm bowl, skim its inner edge, then lift your hand and follow the handle back out into the cool. Only this spoon does not close. The handle leads away into darkness, a utensil missing its loop, and that absence is the story. The tail, too, is a lesson in gentle certainty, always away from the sun, though the camera's angle can trick you, and sometimes jets carve feathery fans within the larger fan, and the whole structure turns not because the comet chooses to turn, but because the sun and the comet and the observer keep shifting their seats. Our part in the geometry is smaller than our wonder, which is perhaps why it makes such good company for sleep. We are witnesses whose presence does not change the plot. The planets continue their patient circles. The interstellar visitor keeps its gracious straight curve. The light keeps carrying dust outward like breath on cold glass. And once the moment of nearest touch passes, the glow will begin to thin, not all at once, but with the steadiness of a tide going out. Each week a little, each month a little more, until the coma's fleece is faint and the nucleus is a syllable at the edge of hearing. By then the numbers will have done their work, the ephemerides will have marched the dates across observatory calendars, the diagrams will have bent their arrows outward into the dark, and we will have learned what we could about a path that was always a farewell. And still the geometry will sing underneath it all, the quiet song that keeps Earth faithful to its year, that lets Mars be farther and colder, that welcomes a stranger for a single bow and then opens the door, and in that song there is no alarm at all, only the shared relief of things behaving as they should, an open orbit remaining open, a goodbye that is not a loss but a gift, a reminder that even the quickest visitor can move slowly enough to watch if we let our thoughts slow down with it. So breathe and picture the chalk on stone again, a line catching moonlight, curving once, then continuing, and know that we will follow it with the same steady eyes we brought to first light. October for the warmest whisper, December for the far hello, and then the long kind dark where the traveller will keep going, and our world will keep circling, and the space between those two truths will be large enough to sleep in. Before dawn, when the grass is silver and your breath turns to lace, you can sometimes hear a fountain before you see it. just a hush of water naming the air. That is how the story of 3i Atlas turns next. Not with a flare, not with a shout, but with a quiet, measurable breath, far from the warmth where most comets fully wake. Astronomers pointed a small, faithful eye in space, the Swift telescope, toward the dim smear and listened in ultraviolet, a colour our eyes cannot keep, but detectors can cradle. In that light they found the signature of OH, a tiny fragment made when sunlight touches water and splits it, the way a careful hand might break a stick of chalk. O is a child of H2O. If you can count the children, you can guess the size of the family. From those lines, thin as spider silk on the spectrum, they inferred water escaping at tens of kilograms each second, while the comet still rested around 3.5 astronomical units from the sun. Say that slowly, not close, not warm, not yet under the bright interrogation lamp of perihelion, and yet already breathing. For a sleeper, this is the gentlest alarm clock. Most comets rouse in stages as they fall inward. Far out, beyond the orbit of Mars, some will shed a whisper of gas if carbon monoxide or carbon dioxide hides in their pores. Those ices sublimate in the long cold where water still dreams. Water usually waits. It prefers closer rooms, where sunlight is steady and direct, where frost can turn to vapour without apology. But 3i Atlas, a traveller not raised in our sun's nursery, began to show water's trace earlier than custom, as if the coma, the faint atmosphere that wraps a comet's hidden heart, were filled with minute ice grains that carried little stores of H2O of their own. Imagine the nucleus as a dark loaf and the coma as a cloud of breadcrumbs. If the crumbs are icy, each can steam a little in the sun, and the sum of those breaths becomes a fountain the instruments can hear. You don't need violence for this, and there is no drama to the numbers, only steadiness. A production rate like a row of taps left barely open, each drop small, the bucket filling all the same. If you let your mind drift down inside that coma, you can picture the grains as snow in a globe, shaken by the faintest motions, jets that hiss and fade, sunlight that grows and recedes with the comet's slow spin. Some grains are large and fall back, some are small and ride the light, pushed outward into the tail the way dandelion seeds float on a breeze. Water does not last long once sunlight breaks it. O is the brief echo, the bell still ringing after the bowl is removed. The telescopes do not hear the water directly. They register the echo, then translate the music back into the instrument that played it. This is a kind of stargazer's synesthesia. Colours outside human sight become numbers within human sleep. There is a deeper quiet in this finding. It suggests that the surface and near-surface layers of the nucleus are not sealed under a crust of stone, not entirely locked away by some ancient shell whose only answer to the sun is silence. Instead, the skin of this visitor seems friable, a word that sounds like a lull, and means easy to crumble, easy to shed. In some places, water may be bound up in grains released not by warmth alone, but by the slightest stresses, the lifting of carbon dioxide deep within, the crackle of temperature changing by a handful of degrees with each turn, the slow flex of a body warmed on one side while the other side remains night cold. Picture a sleeper turning under a blanket. The motion is barely there, and yet the blanket loosens, and a little heat escapes. In the same way, faint activity far from the sun can loosen small particles that take the story with them. If you listen carefully to the rhythm of this chapter, you'll hear other instruments join the song. The photometric storytellers, the watchers who record brightness night after night, found that the light from 3i Atlas rose with distance in a way that felt familiar, not fragile, like a well-behaved comet waking on schedule. No tantrums, no wild leaps, only a slope that a patient pencil can follow. From such light curves and from the colours that ride within, the watchers guess at grain sizes. Larger grains make the glow warmer, like old parchment drift. Smaller grains cool the colour, a milkiness that spreads. Nothing is forced. The inferences arrive like tide, one lapping edge at a time. You may wonder how far we should trust our own quietness here. After all, we're telling a bedtime story about the physics of frost, and some stories reach beyond what the light can prove. So we hold to the phrasing that keeps sleep safe and science honest. Suggests, implies, is consistent with. Swift's ultraviolet lines mean OH is there. OH means water was there very recently. The amount implies a gentle but real flow. The distances, 3-4 astronomical units, are farther than typical for water-driven Comet, which in turn suggests icier grains, extended sources, or a skin that flakes easily in the cold. The words are warm, but the foundation is firm. In the glow, there may be chemistry that speaks in languages we don't yet hear often. Other teams, with instruments sensitive to different lines, have begun to whisper about nickel and iron in unusual proportions, about metals that usually sleep in stone showing up as free atoms in the gas, perhaps carried in strange molecular coats that break apart under sunlight. Those notes belong to another chapter, but they drift through this one like incense. They remind us that a comet's breath is not only water and dust, it is a library of ices, salts, and fragile molecules that remember the clouds where worlds were swaddled. 3 Atlas is old in a way that makes our oldest mountain sound young. The water it exhales could be older than the minerals beneath your city, older than the oceans we know. When you hear OH in ultraviolet, you are, for a second, eavesdropping on an era before our sun learned its own name. Let's stay close to the simple picture. The traveller is still far. The sun is a pale stove on a distant counter, and yet the kettle sings. A little at first, then a little more. The tale thickens by threads. The coma unbuttons another collar. Imagine cupping your hands near the faintest campfire. Your skin tells you are warmer before your eyes admit it. Instruments are skin for the sky. They count what we would miss and lay it out like beadwork. Tens of kilograms per second is not much when you think of waterfalls or rainstorms, but across a day and a week and a month it is plenty. Dust grains salted with water slip outward. They drag a thin breeze. A larger grain falls back like a sleepy bee returning to the hive. The hive itself turns and turns. Every comet that comes close enough becomes a lesson in how solids respond to light. Ice is patient. Rock remembers. Carbon dances first when it's not tightly held. In some comets, the order is clean. Carbon monoxide far out. Carbon dioxide a little nearer. Water nearer still. In others, the layers have been shuffled, baked, and cracked by many passages. 3I Atlas has no previous path around our sun, no old scorch marks from close returns, no baked rind from many summers. What it carries on its surface and just beneath is a note from another nursery pinned to its sleeve. The early trace of water tells us that the note is readable at room temperature lower than ours, that either the paper is thin or the ink runs easily, to stretch the metaphor as far as it will go in a sleepy room. Close your eyes and picture it not as a smear, but as a place. A small, irregular, dark core laced with pockets and veins, warmed across one face, cooling across the other, fissures opening and knitting on a daily rhythm no one has named yet. Sunlight creeps along a ridge. The smallest jet burps, then rests. A patch of dust slips, revealing paler grains beneath. Electrostatic whispers lift motes that drift, settle, lift again. No explosions, no fireworks, only the many tiny surrenders that add up to motion you can measure from an ocean away. The coma is a snow globe and a veil. Inside it, photons and molecules play a quiet tag. Outside it, the tail relaxes downwind, always away from the sun, always carving the same long teardrop even as the whole scene turns. If you ask what this means for the weeks to come, the answer is soothing. More of the same, with the dimmer raised half a notch at a time. As the comet leans inward, the water lines should strengthen and then ebb. The dust should grow more confident and then thin. If icy grains are truly the chorus behind the far-out ouch, then near perihelion we may hear them sing in harmonies, broad, soft bands in the spectrum that tell us the grains are many sizes at once, each with its own short life. If the nucleus is small, as the sharpest eyes suggest, then the great curve of its path will ignore the tiny pushes of its own breathing. It will not bump into any new fate simply by exhaling a little more. Even the changes that feel big to us, an extra few tens of kilograms per second, a day with a little more jetting, a fan of dust that opens wider, are small motions in the long view. The geometry you met in the last chapter continues to hold the lantern. The physics of snow and light simply adds texture to the floor. And so we rock in this gentle contradiction. Early water in a late room, a fountain before dawn. We are learning that far and near are not as strict for comets as we once taught them to be, especially for visitors that formed under different suns, with different blends of ice and grit, different histories of heat and shock. To sleep inside that thought is to sleep inside a museum where the exhibits walk past you, each carrying a label you can only read when the beam of your lamp tilts just so. Tonight the label reads, Wage, and below it, small letters, no exclamation marks. Water present, steady release, far from warmth. Let that be enough. Let it be the sound of a fountain you can't quite see, a reminder that not all awakenings require noon. Somewhere between Mars and Jupiter, between what we call cold and what a comet calls comfortable. 3i Atlas is misting the dark with a breath we can count. The count will change, the breath will thicken, then, after the sun touch, the breath will thin again. Far behind all of this, the stars stay fixed to our eyes, and the path remains open, and the meaning is uncomplicated. A traveller from elsewhere is teaching us softly that water does not need to shout to be heard, that the universe will tell you secrets if you agree to listen in the colours where your body does not, that the first true sign a stranger is awake is often the smallest, one molecule broken into two, one bell rung and fading, one quiet hush in the ultraviolet that says, in the kindest possible voice, I am here. In a quiet room where the lights are dimmed to protect the eyes, a spectrograph hums like a cat at rest, and a thin ribbon of rainbow slides across a sensor, carrying secrets that no photograph can show. This is how we learn to hear a comet breathe in more than water, by listening to the narrow notes of metals and molecules threaded through its light. With 3 Atlas, the first clear, curious murmur came from nickel. Neutral nickel singing in lines so fine you could mistake them for scratches, while iron, its usual companion in old comet tales, answered faintly or not at all. The story was not loud, and no one wise treated it as a proclamation. It arrived as a suggestion, the way a scent arrives before you find the flower. Nickel here, iron quieter, and the balance shifting as the traveller inched closer to the sun. You can picture the instrument as a harp strung with hundreds of invisible strings, each string tuned to the energy an atom needs to glow. When the comet turns its face, some strings begin to hum, others fall silent, and in that pattern, hums and hushes, rises and fades, we begin to guess the chemistry of a world we cannot touch. Perhaps the nickel is carried not as bare metal, but wrapped in fragile cloaks, carbonyls with long names that fall apart in sunlight, releasing atoms one by one. Perhaps the iron is held more tightly, bound in grains that do not surrender until the stove is warmer, or not at all. Perhaps both are present and the room is simply too cold for one to speak above a whisper. All of these are ways to say the same careful thing. The lines we hear are real. The cause is still a question, and the question will be answered only by patience. There is comfort in the patience. Night by night the watchers return to the slit of the instrument, lay the comet's light down like a thread, and measure again. The ratio bends one way, then another. A line that was timid at one distance toughens later. A line that strutted early softens, as if embarrassed by its own confidence. This is what warming does to a primitive surface. It loosens some bonds and tightens others. It opens doors we did not know were doors. It turns on little factories in the coma where grains and gas trade parts with sunlight as foremen. Nothing here requires drama to be strange. To find nickel without its usual chorus of iron is already a small oddness, like hearing the low strings of an orchestra before the violins take their chairs. To watch that oddness change with distance is stranger still, because change is a clock you can set, and clocks tell you when to look again. The best kind of mystery for sleep is the kind that promises tomorrow will be clearer if you rest now. Do not let anyone borrow your rest with too eager stories. A comet is not a machine because a metal line appears. The sky is not a message centre because an atom glows. The truth is gentler and more magnificent. In the dust and gas that seep from 3i Atlas there is a record of a nursery not ours, a blend of ices and grains baked and shocked and frozen under a star that did not know our name. Heavy atoms live there, tucked into salts and rocks, into fragile molecules that only survive when it is dark and cold, then blossom into single notes when the sun speaks. We have heard metals in comets before, here in our own family. We have watched ratios change with heat, with distance, with the grain sizes that a nucleus sheds. What is new here is the specific way the hum begins. Nickel stepping forward first, iron shading the back row, and the arrangement evolving as the days pass. It is a choreography, not a confession, a clue, not a verdict. If you imagine the nucleus as a cupboard of jars with fading labels, then spectroscopy is the soft light you shine inside without opening anything, and what you see are the motes that leak out when you tilt the door. Nickel drifts first, you note that. Iron waits, you note that too. You write it down in pencil because warmth has a habit of rewriting you. The beauty of listening in lines is that the coma becomes a map. Water's child, OH, draws the big lake. Carbon species sketch the rivers. Sodium sometimes paints a hushed golden band at the edge of vision. And metals, when they appear, are like street lamps along the shore, rare, oddly placed, and revealing curves you might not have traced otherwise. In 3i Atlas, those little lamps have flickered on earlier than expected, and with an arrangement that invites questions about how dust is made, unmade, and made again as it drifts. Large grains can shelter atoms in their shade. Small grains surrender them quickly to light. Charged grains dance a different dance than neutral ones. Jets braid paths through all of it, stirring pockets where chemistry lingers longer. The spectrum remembers these motions the way a lake remembers the wind, in ripples that fall away slowly after the gust. If you could see the lines the way instruments do, you would see the hum of nickel as a thin set of rails, straight and sure, and iron as rails you think are there, faint as chalk, becoming bolder only when the morning warms. You would see that the rails move closer together as the comet nears the sun, not because the atoms change their minds, but because there are more of them, and the light is steadier on their faces. You would feel no need to force the picture into shapes it does not fit. It is enough that a traveller from another nursery carries an accent in its breath. Some nights the best use of a mystery is not to solve it, but to be slowed by it. Nickel without iron speaks to the part of us that knows a whisper can be lovelier than a speech. It invites us to sit with the possibilities, that carbonyls born in deeper cold have followed the comet into our light and are peeling apart grain by grain, that iron is bound in a different matrix, one that resists the first long hours of morning, that the nucleus is layered like pastry, fines above, sturdier crumbs below, and we are only tasting the top while the oven is just coming on. It invites us to remember that every ratio we write today will be read again after perihelion, when the stove has done its work and the shelves have shifted. The lines will change, they always do. Some will strengthen, some will fade. New ones will appear like distant bells in fog, and others we thought important will quiet without apology. Data has its own manners. It teaches us to breathe at its speed. And so, while the graphs climb and sink, we let the mind drift to scale. A few kilometres of nucleus, perhaps less, wrapped in a veil that could swallow cities, wrapped in a tail that could lay a pale brushstroke across the orbit of a planet. In that immensity, the atoms we argue over are a handful of sparks, yet what sparks they are, telling us not only that metals are loose in the coma, but that the way they loosen is particular to this guest. 3i Atlas is not Oumuamua, with its strange silence. It is not Borisov, with its classic breath rich in carbon monoxide. It is a third voice, a third dialect, water spoken early in the cold, and metals that clear their throats in an order that makes us tilt our heads. It widens the choir. It asks us to tune our ears. It promises that when we listen again, after the sun has pressed a little harder, the harmony will be different, and the difference will teach. Breathe, then, with the instrument. Picture the slit as a low window in a dark room, and the comet's light as wind that carries pollen. Some pollen glows silver, some bronze, some is too heavy to fly until noon. We sit by the window and collect what drifts in. We do not call it a signal from elsewhere. We call it weather from a garden we have never walked. If we are careful, if we wait, we will know which flowers grow there, which seeds rise first, which only open when the day is nearly done. And when we write that down, in pencils and in papers, it will not be to end the story, but to make the next chapter possible. The nickel whispers now. The iron will answer in its time, the chemistry will thicken and clear like breath on glass, and in the background the geometry holds, the water flows, the distance stays kind. Nothing urgent happens, everything important does. This is how a comet teaches, by singing in narrow lines while the night rolls on, by letting a single atom's glow carry a history across millions of kilometres, and by reminding the listener that wonder does not need volume to be heard. Before the name, before the headlines, before any of us whispered interstellar into a drowsy room, there were photographs of the night that no one knew to treasure, wide fields salted with stars and a speck that had not yet earned attention. And this is the slow, patient act of going back to those nights and opening their drawers, the archivist of the sky unrolling film and calling up digital frames and laying them side by side like panes of river ice so the current underneath can be seen. In those frames, weeks before the discovery note, the speck is there, thin as breath, fainter than a moth wing against a porch light, lying exactly where the mathematics says it must lie, and the magic is not magic at all, only the human habit of checking, of turning a question into a thread and following the thread through rooms already walked. And each time the speck appears, the thread tightens until it becomes a line, and the line becomes a path, and the path becomes the quiet knowledge that this object was moving in plain sight while nobody knew its name. The astronomers call it precovery, which is a word with both humility and pride inside it, because it admits that the past is full of answers we only learn to read later, and it glows with the confidence that if we keep our ledgers clean, and our cupboards labelled, "We can, on a soft morning, recover a night's truth from a month we thought we'd finished with." So they pulled June into July, and July into the present, and let the faint dots step across the screen in dignified increments. Each position stamped with a time, each time weighted into the orbit until the orbit stops fluttering and holds, and as that orbit hardens, another softer story takes shape. The story of brightness, and what brightness means when it comes from dust and ice instead of flame. Because the light from 3i Atlas did not jump like a startled bird, it rose with distance the way a tide climbs ashore, a measured swelling that photometrists love for its steadiness. And when they plot that swell against the comet's sun distance, they see a slope that feels well behaved, a power of R that draws a smooth curve through the points, a curve you could trace with a fingertip in the dark. And the message inside that slope is not fire, not upheaval, not the kind of outburst that spins gossip out of a small world, but the simpler, calmer news that dust production was low and rising, and that the coma's faint veil thickened in a way that speaks of regular physics rather than surprises. You can imagine the numbers like notes in a margin. A handful of kilograms of dust each second when summer was young, a few tens by the time mid-July leaned into its heat. And those numbers are small by waterfall standards and enormous by bedroom standards, and just right by comet standards when the sun is still far and the stove barely warm. There is a kind of intimacy in that modesty, because it says the nucleus was not beating its chest. It was breathing, and its breath was enough to carry grains into the light without tearing itself or startling the watchers. And when the teams look farther back still, out toward places where Jupiter keeps its long seasons, they see nothing in the test surveys that would count as shouting. No early blaze, no distant flares, only a darkness that fits the idea that the comet had not yet come into the company of sunlight strong enough to ring it like a bell. And this absence is not emptiness. It is a good kind of quiet, because it tells us that the turn-on was near the distances where carbon dioxide begins to stir, a 9 AU neighbourhood where water still sleeps but other ices develop an appetite, and if CO2 whispered first and lifted grains with it, and if those grains carried their own tiny stores of H2O to be split into OH by sunlight, then the far-out water in the last chapter becomes less a surprise and more a letter from a different chemistry set, the kind you only find when you look for it with instruments that listen in colours you cannot see. Let your mind follow the practical work in all of this. A graduate student whose eyes are raw from staring at thumbnails hovers her cursor and adds a faint detection to a ledger. An older observer in a different time zone stacks a night's run and subtracts the stars and smiles. When the residual glow aligns with the predicted place within a few arc seconds, a programmer tweaks a background model to keep the galaxy behind the comet from pretending to be the comet itself, and all across the planet. That week the same soft work happens. Calibrate, subtract, stack, compare, until a dozen quiet confirmations make the orbit's ribbon narrow into confidence, and alongside the orbit, the brightness curve smooths its wrinkles, and the slope firms up into a sentence whose grammar says no tantrums, and the dust estimates derived from that sentence sketch a body that isn't shedding stones, just letting go a fine snow that builds a tail the way patience builds a habit. Think of the nucleus now as a dark almond in a pocket of cold, its crust seasoned by a star we do not know, its beneath stitched with layers that time and collision and freezing have assembled into a book none of us can open, and the sun as a lamp turned slowly up from a neighbouring desk, light reaching first the high spots and then the hollows, heat waking first the ices that do not mind the cold, and then the ones that do. And when CO2 begins to lift, it pries loose crumbs that shake free from ridges and hang for a moment in the thin gravity before light, and the smallest breaths of gas carry them outward. And that outward drift is what made the June frames a little brighter than the May frames would have been if we had them, and what made the early July frames brighter still. And if you listen carefully inside that drift, you can hear an ethic of behaviour, consistency rather than drama, the way a good clock improves a room without ever once asking to be seen. This is part of why Precovery feels like a lullaby, because it replaces astonishment with lineage. It shows you that the stranger did not jump into being. It arrived by steps, and in each step the same relationship between sunlight and surface held. And that means when we imagine the days around perihelion, we needn't imagine crisis. We can imagine an increase in the same kind of breath, some jets that flex, some fans that widen, a coma that grows woollier, a tail that swells and then thins, and after the turn the same physics in reverse, the same slope sloping down, the same grains shrinking and settling into space like long confetti whose party is over. Even, the math is gentle when the behaviour is, and for a sleep story that matters, because rest comes easier when the future feels like a continuation rather than a verdict. I want you to picture the desks where ephemerides are made, the charts that give a place and a time for the next night's look, the way observers mark in pencil the hours when the comet will be high enough, and the moon will be kind enough, and the weather might restrain itself. And then picture one other desk, a little messier, where someone keeps a running tally of what the brightness would be if the slope continues. Not because prediction is sport, but because it tells you how long an exposure to plan, which filter to warm up, which telescope to ask a favour from. And all of this practicality is a kind of love letter to the object itself, a promise that we will meet it where it will be whenever the sun and cloud and mountain allow. And while that promise hums, the philosophical part of Precovery settles in, a recognition that the universe writes first and we read later, that the June sky carried the same page as the July sky, but our eyes only learned where to look after the librarian pointed, and that humility feels good at bedtime because it relaxes the spine of certainty and lets the breath sink deeper, and in that deeper breath the details arrange themselves without strain. Activity evident inward of 6.5 astronomical units. A brightness curve consistent with a dust law that speaks of many small grains rather than a few large stones. A dust production that climbed from a few to a few tens of kilograms each second as the sun's hand grew warmer on the comet's cheek. No outbursts loud enough to scare the dark. No misbehaviour that would make us whisper about fragments. Just the old patient lessons of ice and light and how they keep company. By the time you drift toward the end of this chapter, I want you to feel the ground under it. That the path was not a shock but a continuation. That the dust was not a storm but a long snow. That the water we heard in ultraviolet had elder cousins in the grains that left the surface earlier, carrying their own quiet reserves. And that the reason we can say these things softly tonight is not because we are inventing poetry, but because 100 unglamorous comparisons between images made on ordinary nights have been allowed to speak, and they all say the same calm thing, which is that the visitor's approach was steady and its awakening gradual, and the blackouts we will endure when the sun stands between us, and it are only intermissions in a play whose acts are long, and whose ending is a bow, not a blow. And if you need a final picture to hold while your eyes settle, imagine the whole Precovery effort as a small community lantern walk along a country road, neighbours moving their lights from one fence post to the next, finding the path by agreeing on where the previous footstep must have been, and by the time they reach the open, feel the road behind them is visible even to those who didn't start the walk, and that is the gift of looking back. It lets more of us come along. It braids June to December with string you can trust. It teaches you to love the quiet part of discovery, and it sends you to sleep with the knowledge that this story began before you knew it had, and that it will go on after you wake, and that everything important about the way the light rose has already told us that the way it will fall will be the same, measured graceful, ordinary in the best sense of that word, and wonderfully, intimately enough. There is a special kind of honesty in a fuzzy thing that refuses to sharpen, and that is the honesty 3i Atlas offers when we point our finest eyes at it. Not a clean silhouette, not a cinematic ship against the stars, only a soft glow that deepens toward its centre and loosens toward its edges, the classic signature of a small dark nucleus wrapped in a breath of dust and gas. The instruments do what instruments do. They measure how steeply the light climbs as you walk inward, pixel by pixel. They subtract the starlight template. They compare the leftover glow to a coma that would be created by simple, steady drifting grains. And from that patient arithmetic they draw a fence rather than a portrait, a boundary that says the hard little heart must be small, likely only a few kilometres across at most and probably less, too shy to stand out against its own exhale. If you have ever breathed onto a cold window and tried to see the room beyond the fog, you know the feeling of this work. You can prove the glass is there, you can learn the patterns of your breath, but the room itself will not give you its furniture, and so astronomers lean on indirect truths, collecting them like smooth stones. How quickly the coma brightens with sunlight, how the tail expands, how the central peak refuses to sharpen even when the night is perfect. And together those stones build a picture that is all the stronger for having been made without guesswork. A nucleus that is dark as old coal because most cometary surfaces are. A body that spins slowly enough or irregularly enough that its brightness does not drum like a steady metronome. A surface that throws off fine grains rather than boulders, because the coma looks like fleece and not gravel. And about that tail, let us be gentle and clear, because the sky loves to play with perspective. The rule a child can learn is still the rule the cameras keep. Dust tails lean away from the sun because sunlight nudges the smallest grains like a constant wind, while gas tails point even straighter down the same road, and what sometimes looks like a forward glow is not a defiance of physics but the simplest trick of angles, stray light, and jets that happen to be pointed our way for an hour, a day, a week, then fade again, leaving the larger fan in its proper place. Projection is a dreamer's accomplice. Tilt any pale cone and your eye will draw a spear tip where none exists. So the watchers check phase angles and star backgrounds, and they wait for the geometry to turn a few degrees, and when it does, the supposed arrowhead dissolves back into the soft breeze it always was, and the only thing left standing is the old comfort that dust follows light, and light follows the sun. In this blur there are other small kindnesses. When we search for the tiny non-gravitational shoves that outgassing can give a comet, we do not feel much at all, and that lack is itself a whisper about size and activity, because a truly large push would tell on itself by bending the path a measurable hair against the star map, and here the path holds to the smoothness of a good chalk line, so the nucleus can breathe without steering, and the grand curve remains a grand curve. You may hear people asking after shape, potato or shard, sphere or splinter, and the only honest answer for now is that the shape is hidden under its own weather. A traveller in a coat that never comes off long enough for a full-length mirror, and yet even that ignorance is useful, because when the coma brightens and dims with a slow rhythm, over many nights you learn something about the spin, about how sunlight moves across the ridges and hollows, about how jets blink on the day side and mutter on the night side. And that slow, low beat is what editors of light curves cradle when they sit in quiet rooms and remove every star they can, and still the rise and fall remains, a pulse faint and true. What we know softly, that the nucleus reflects little, that it is small, that it is likely irregular in the way of stones shaped by freeze and thaw and time, that the grains it releases are of many sizes because the coma's colour and texture change with distance from the centre like fog that thickens then thins, that jets come and go like tiny sighs rather than cannon blasts, that the whole presence is consistent from week to week, with a body that is intact and polite to its own orbit. And even if a sharper image never arrives, the blur is an honest teacher, because it reminds us that most of the universe is discovered this way, not by silhouettes but by halos, not by edges but by gradients, not by a shout but by a slope. And in that reminder there is a mercy for the sleeper. You do not have to picture a strange machine slipping through our system when the light refuses to draw one for you. You can picture what the measurements invite you to hold. A small, dark almond inside a luminous scarf turning slowly, shedding snow you cannot feel, obeying the old geometry of sunlight and dust, and giving us exactly as much of itself as warmth and distance allow. Imagine standing a little apart from a winter bonfire, close enough that the air tastes of smoke, far enough that the people around it are only outlines, and as you watch the heat shimmer you understand the shape of the fire without needing to see every stick, and the understanding is deeper for being earned. So it is with 3 Atlas in this chapter of its profound and fleeting passage, a celestial dance unfolding across the vast canvas of the cosmos. The immense scale of this enigmatic visitor is taken by the very inference of its existence, its silent journey etched into the fabric of space. Its ethereal shape is not seen but felt, perceived through the gentle rhythmic breath of the solar wind and the subtle shifts in its luminous aura. The celestial tail, a graceful streamer of dust and gas, is read through the intricate angles it carves against the distant stars, a testament to the forces that govern its trajectory. Its arduous path is held with unwavering precision by the invisible, powerful palm of gravity, a force that guides all wanderers through the cosmic ocean. And when, later, as the comet continues its inexorable outward journey, the luminous coma begins to thin, its radiance subtly diminishing as the immense distance between us and it grows, and the elusive nucleus, the true heart of this celestial traveller, hides itself even more completely in the impenetrable darkness of the night. We will not be poorer for never having been afforded the privilege of seeing it in its pristine, unblemished clarity. This is because the profound truth we needed, the essence of its being, was never resident in the sharp, definitive lines of a perfect silhouette. Instead, it resided in the enduring constancy of the blur, a testament to its inherent nature. A comet behaving with the unpredictable, wild grace of a true comet, a restless traveller perpetually enshrouded in its own unique swirling weather. It is a once-only guest in our terrestrial skies, a fleeting visitor that will not be coerced into obliging the harsh, revealing glare of a spotlight. Yet it will graciously accept the softer, more intimate illumination of a lantern, a beacon of curiosity and quiet observation. And with that humble lantern in hand, we can, for a precious while, walk beside it, a silent companion on its cosmic voyage. We can walk long enough, observe intently enough, to learn a profound and beautiful lesson, that to be small and dark in the vastness of the universe is not to harbour a secret, but rather it is to possess a kind of understated grace, a quiet dignity, and that a soft, persistent glow, when it is meticulously measured, thoughtfully observed and deeply understood, can, in its profound authenticity, be more real, more tangible than any sharply defined edge or definitive form the human mind might impulsively wish into being, striving for an illusory certainty. So, for now, let us breathe with it, in harmony with the gentle rhythmic exhalation of its coma. Let us breathe slowly, deliberately, and without any sense of hurried expectation, allowing the profound knowledge to settle deeply within us, that the inherent softness you perceive the beautiful indistinctness is not a manifestation of ignorance or a lack of clarity. Rather, it is the very shape, the intrinsic form of what this celestial thing truly is. It is a blur because it is perpetually breathing, exhaling the very essence of its being into the void. It is a blur because it is ceaselessly moving, traversing unimaginable distances with graceful momentum. And it is a blur because the immense distance separating us, the pervasive light of the distant sun, and the countless motes of dust and ice, all conspire in a cosmic ballet to weave an intricate shimmering veil around it. And behind this ethereal veil, the enigmatic nucleus, the quiet core of this magnificent wanderer, continues its silent, solitary rotation, shedding its constituent elements and steadfastly keeping its own counsel, a wisdom born of eons of cosmic journey. And this, for us tonight, is more than enough. It is enough for this present moment of shared wonder, and it is profoundly enough for the long inevitable goodbye already indelibly written into the comet's predetermined path, a testament to the cyclical nature of all things in the grand unfolding tapestry of the universe. There is a moment in every long journey when the road that has only been warming beneath your feet finally begins to glow, and for a comet that moment is perihelion, the nearest brush with the sun, a slow curtsy rather than a plunge, a bow taken at about 1.4 astronomical units for 3 Atlas, close enough that sunlight becomes a pressure and a recipe, close enough that ice rearranges itself into breath and dust into a veil, and the whole traveller seems to inhale and exhale in longer sentences. Imagine the days before that turn as a long hallway where the thermostat rises a single degree each step, and the first things to wake are the ones that love the cold. Carbon dioxide whispering from pores and lifting grains as if they were pollen. Then water joining in, not with a shout but with a steadier tone. And all the while the nucleus turns, and each turn brings a different patch of skin to morning, and each patch answers a little differently, so the coma thickens like fog at dawn. Not all at once, but with pockets, tendrils, small regions of denser breath braided by sunlight and rotation, and the tiniest size of gas. Perihelion itself does not arrive with symbols. It arrives like the warmest room in a quiet house, and in that room the chemistry that has been hinted at becomes clearer. Not because the comet grows louder, though it might, but because the light is kinder to our instruments, and the lines that were faint begin to write themselves more legibly along the senses we've trained to hear them. Water's fragments tracing the big lake of the coma, carbon species sketching their rivers, and those shy metals we met in a previous chapter, stepping on stage in a different order, as heat undoes different knots in dust and grain, and at the edge of sight the tail spreads its pale fan a little wider, the way a hand opens when it relaxes in sleep. There is also a geometry to this that is as important to mood as to math, because as the comet leans toward the sun there is a short interval, when the sun walks between us and the visitor and throws a curtain across the stage, a conjunction blackout, not a plot twist but an intermission, and in that hush every watcher on Earth becomes a listener, waiting for the first whisper after the lights rise again, a day or a week when the comet glides back out from the glare, and the same paragraph we were reading before continues, except now the type is a little darker, the margins a little wider, and the commas of jets and feathery fans are easier to see. This is the part of the story where patience pays for itself, because the changes we foretold begin to behave like they promised they would. Production rates rising by inches, not miles. Spectral notes that were shy becoming confident. And then, later, polite again. Dust colours shifting toward warmer or cooler as the grain recipe changes one handful at a time. And none of it demands you sit bolt upright. It only asks that you keep breathing with it, a matching rhythm, slow and low, like counting waves while you drift on your back. If you could stand just off stage in this warmest room and watch the nucleus directly, you'd see nothing like the explosions our childhood cartoons taught. You'd see work. You'd see surfaces that were glassy last month now crazed by fine cracks. You'd see a slope shrug and let go a trickle of grains. You'd see a darker patch stay quiet until local noon and then offer a thin plume that looks like smoke but isn't. You'd see a fan that leans a degree with every hour of rotation. You'd see the comet's tiny gravity catch some of what it throws and let the rest ride away on light, and you'd hear the same long exhale we've been hearing for weeks, just fuller now, as if a singer has found the centre of the note. Observers do not need that view to know the act. They watch from a far balcony, and the things they measure make the same picture. The coma brightens and softens at the edges. The tail lays down new layers on old layers, each with its own clock, so that synchrones and syndines, those lovely old names for dust released at different times and pushed by different pressures, paint a fan that looks simple to a sleepy eye and rich to a graph. One of the kindest shapes to behold in this season is the way the tail points without needing to be told. Away from the sun, a steady flag in a wind that does not tire, and sometimes a narrow ion ribbon will flare straight as a rule and then fade, while the dust keeps its broader, more forgiving curve. And in those changes there is a lesson every bedtime story loves to teach. That even when many things are happening at once, the melody can still be easy to hum if you listen for the low notes. As for the little nucleus at the heart of the blur, perihelion will not make it betray itself. It will still be small, still be shy, and the work of those who hunt for slight twists in its path, the tiny sideways nudge that comes when outgassing acts like a slow propeller, will stay the work of fine rulers and quiet comparisons, not the work of waving arms. If there is any additional spin-up from uneven jets, it will likely be a change we sense in rhythm rather than see in silhouette. The coma's centerline brightens and dims with a period that lengthens or shortens by a whisper, and somewhere a light curve editor leans back and smiles because the numbers agree with the story the telescope told in colour. In the Journal of Sleep, that smile is a lullaby on its own, because it means the comet is doing what comets do, and not asking anything of us but attention. The instruments watching during this season are different flutes in the same orchestra. Some are ground-based mirrors with night air peeling in thin rivers over their glass. Some are spaceborne eyes with no weather but a slow drift. Some rent time near dawn when the atmosphere steadies. Some own the dark so well they know when to close their lids and wait for turbulence to calm, and all of them will write the same banal and beautiful sentence with different pens. The traveller is warmer now, the gases are bolder, the dust is more plentiful and still made of many sizes. The metals are arranging themselves in a new conversation, and the whole ensemble will cool and quiet again on the far side of the turn. Past perihelion the story does not end. It inverts, like a tide changing direction in a shallow bay. What rose begins to fall, not precipitously, not in a way that startles, but with that same dependability we learned during the approach. The oach lines that had grown strong begin to thin. The carbon bands relax. The nickel and iron exchange the foreground and background like patient actors trading places. The dust production eases by small steps. The coma shrinks in a way you can sketch with a dull pencil and still be right. And through all of it, the tail keeps its polite posture, always away from the sun, as if to remind us that some rules are both simple and profound. And while the chemistry and the light do their gentle work, the geometry keeps time. Phase angles change, bringing out one aspect of the coma or suppressing another. The line of sight through the tail lengthens or shortens, making it look more solid one week and more gauzy the next. And because both Earth and the comet are moving, some nights the fan seems to turn a shoulder to us, and then return its face, a shy dancer following marks on a floor we cannot see. And that play of angles is enough to make any stray ideas about forward glows and secret spearheads dissolve back into the ordinary miracle of perspective. We are the ones moving. The light is the one pushing. The comet is the one breathing. And together those truths make pictures that change while the rules do not. What many people love about this part of a comet's life is the way it lets prediction and humility hold hands. We can say what will likely happen because we have watched so many of these passages before, and still we can be surprised, and the surprises are almost always small and instructive, rather than large and frightening. A jet that lasts longer into dusk than we thought, a patch that refuses to wake at local noon and then sings after, a day when a tiny outburst makes the brightness curve hop a little and then slide back to its slope, an ion ribbon that reappears when the solar wind changes mood. The instruments will catch these and annotate them, and the annotations will be footnotes in a long text rather than eruptions that break the page, and for a 2-hour sleep journey that is ideal, because the mind can wander and return without losing the plot, and the plot is only this, that 3 Atlas will come to its warmest moment, and then it will leave it, and as it leaves it will calm, and as it calms it will offer us its last and perhaps clearest answers about what it carried from its other nursery. How water behaves in a skin that has never been baked by our sun, how dust sizes blend when they are not the product of a dozen previous summers, how metals unbutton from grains when the stove is set only to warm and not to hot. And those answers will not shout, they will accumulate, grain by grain, spectrum by spectrum, line by line, into a knowledge we can keep after the comet is gone. Picture the calendar for this chapter with the numbers rubbed off so only the moods remain. A page with a gentle rise toward a bright circle that is not a warning light but a hearth. A brief shade when the sun stands between us and the fire, and we sip our tea and wait. A resuming of the same slow lines under a kinder lamp. Then a descent written in the same hand as the ascent, and finally a margin where the paper grows pale and the ink light, and the story becomes a memory, and the memory becomes an invitation to watch again when the next traveller comes. That is the shape of perihelion and beyond for 3 Atlas, a season of work for the instruments, and a season of permission for those who listen to fall asleep to the sound of physics behaving itself. The comet will not change its nature because the sun brushes it. It will express its nature more clearly, and then it will fold that expression back into quiet as distance grows. The very best part of that for us is how much of it is testable kindness. We will look for the lines we expect and note the ones we did not. We will weigh the grains with colours and compare them with the weeks before. We'll check whether the nickel still speaks first or starts to share the microphone with iron. We will measure whether the faintest push of outgassing shows up in the chalk line of the orbit, or whether gravity's hand keeps the chalk true, and we will do all of that without having to raise our voices because the comet is generous and the night is long. When you finally let your eyes close on this chapter, I hope you feel the warmth of that hearth from a safe distance, and I hope you can picture the visitor making its small bow and slipping past, the way a courteous guest thanks a host and steps out into the cool, leaving only the scent of smoke and snow in the doorway, and an assurance that in the mornings to come the air beyond the window will be a little clearer for having been breathed by something from far away. If you lie very still, you can hear how the universe clears its throat between visitors, and in that quiet the 3 we have met so far arrange themselves like instruments taking their seats. Oumuamua first, the odd woodwind that played without a visible breath. Borisov second, a steady brass voice with the round, familiar timbre of a comet from home. And now 3 Atlas, a stringed instrument tuned a little differently, plucking notes we recognise and some we do not. And when you let those sounds braid into one another, the differences stop being a contest and become a kind of harmony that tells you more than any solo could. Because the first traveller, Oumuamua, slipped through our light with no soft haze, no coma, no tail we could catch, only a brightening and dimming that hinted at shape and spin, a long body or a flat one turning in a tumble, and a whisper of non-gravitational acceleration that made thinkers argue gently in papers and at coffee about what could push without light to see, gas we missed, ices we had not expected, outgassing too fine for our eyes, or the pressure of sunlight on a skin as glossy as an idea. And then Borisov came, a comfort to those who wanted something they could name without a shrug, because it showed a real coma, a true tale, bands of carbon and cyanogen and simple molecules that breathe when any iced body feels a star, and it seemed in its chemistry to rhyme with comets that belong to our own family, only louder in some places, richer in carbon monoxide. A voyager whose suitcase contents felt ordinary in the best way, the way a traveller's bread smells like bread no matter how far he has walked. And then Atlas arrived, and in it there is both a hand we can shake and a cuff we cannot yet read, because this one is unquestionably cometary. Coma scene, tail obeying the old rule away from the sun, grain by grain of veil woven just as sunlight always weaves, and yet it began to whisper water early, far out where water usually keeps its counsel, as if the coma were seeded with tiny icy grains that could steam on their own, while the nucleus still dreamed, and in its spectrum the metals made their entrance with the modest drama of nickel first and iron later, an order that raised eyebrows, not because metals in a comet are a surprise, they are not, but because the way they stepped forward and stepped back as warmth grew felt like a dance we had not watched in just this order before, and that is how you build a choir out of three voices you might otherwise set to arguing. The first says not. All interstellar visitors wear a visible breath. The second says some do and carry their gases like badges you can read at a glance, and the third says some will do that, and also clear their throats in a dialect that asks you to lean in. The shapes of their paths differ too, and yet they tell the same larger story because each fell toward the sun, on a curve that would not close. Each greeted us and left without circling for a second bow, and together they remind us that interstellar space is not empty of small, primitive things. It is busy with them, and the lanes between stars carry seeds all the time, most of which we never see, and three of which we have now greeted with enough care to write down. And if you are tempted, half awake, to sort them by strangeness, to stack them like stones from most to least unusual, let that temptation pass with your next breath. Because the better lullaby is the one that smooths their differences into a single idea. Diversity is the rule of birth. Planetary nurseries freeze and knead and bake their crumbs in different orders. Stars flare and fade in different rhythms. Shocks travel through clouds at different times. And what looks to us like surprise is the ordinary outcome of 1,000 histories we did not see. Which is why Oumuamua's clean silence is not a ghost story. It is an accent. Borisov's classic breath is not a cliché. It is a reassurance. And Atlas's early water and nickel first murmur is not a riddle. It is a letter from a workshop whose tools we're just learning to name, even their sizes guessed at with fences rather than portraits. Take their places in the choir. Oumuamua likely small, perhaps a handful of hundreds of meters along its longest mood. Borisov a more generous nucleus under its active scarf. Atlas a shy heart of only a few kilometers at most and probably less. A dark almond that refuses a clean outline because it is dressed in its own weather. Yet none of these measures turns one into the explanation for the other two. They stay themselves and still sing together. Think, too, of how they handled sunlight. One shrugged it off without a coma we could measure. One bloomed like a comrade from our own Oort cloud would bloom. One missed it early, and then promised a warmer chorus near perihelion, and in those three behaviours there is a sketch of a spectrum, dry to classic with quirks, that makes the mind rest easier, because it says there is no single template we must force upon whatever comes next. There is only listening. And if you want a softer, human key to file them under, listen to the questions each taught us to ask. Oumuamua taught us to ask what counts as outgassing, when the gas is faint and fleeting, and the push is small, and whether shapes and surfaces we have not catalogued in our backyard might live elsewhere. Borisov taught us to ask how similar interstellar comets are to ours, and whether the ingredients for worlds are broadly shared. Atlas is teaching us to ask how soon water can make itself heard when grains carry it, how metals unbutton from dust when the oven is set to warm rather than hot, how a nucleus that has never been baked by our sun presents its skin to morning, and whether the faintest pushes of its own breath ever show up in the chalk line of its path. Lay those questions side by side, and you will see they are not in competition. They are a curriculum, and we are only at lesson 3. And for a sleep story, the curriculum is better than any cliffhanger, because it replaces the itch of urgency with the balm of continuity. Lets you nestle into the knowledge that whether the next voice we meet is silent and polished, or frosty and loud or quiet with a handful of strange notes, it will take its place without breaking the music. So breathe once for Oumuamua and its clean line, once for Borisov and its familiar plume, once for Atlas and its early fountain and its nickel whisper, and on the exhale let them become one long chord under your thoughts, the sound of small dark travellers moving through a galaxy that is not empty, the sound of evidence accumulating without the need for noise, the sound of science content to watch and wait and write the soft sentences that make a night feel safe. There have been 3 so far, each different, each honest, each on a path that will not close, and the only thing we can be certain of is not that the 4th will resemble any of them, but that when it appears we will have learned how to listen a little better, and our listening will make the dark friendlier, and our sleep deeper, and our gratitude steadier for the simple fact that in a universe of storms and sparks, there are also long, quiet passages where travellers pass, tell us who they are in the smallest ways, and keep going. There is a comfort in knowing which questions will answer themselves if we give the night enough time, and which will stay softly closed, and for Thrisi Atlas that comfort is a narrow path we can walk without hurrying, a sequence of gentle checks that do not require drama to be beautiful. We will listen first for water's echo to rise and fall in step with distance, growing a little stronger as warmth gathers, then loosening after the turn, and with it the simple colours of the coma shifting as grains change size, a warmer tint when larger crumbs carry the light, a cooler veil when the small dust takes over, and in those changes a calendar we can hum under our breath. We will watch the modest metal lines that arrived like shy guests, nickel, then iron, trade places as the stove sets itself from warm to warmer and back again, because chemistry has manners when the temperature changes, and manners make curves you can trace with a fingertip. We will weigh the dust by brightness, the way bakers weigh flour by feel, not because we are guessing, but because steady slopes turn light into mass, and mass into a quiet estimate of how quickly the nucleus exhales, a few scoops, more some weeks, a few scoops less when the distance grows, never a shout, always a tide. We will look for the heartbeat of spin hidden in the light itself, the slow rise and slow fall of the centre as the day side of the nucleus turns to face us and then turns away, a period lengthening or shortening by a whisper. If one jet has just a little more say than the others, a whisper you can hear only if you sit very still. We will lay a ruler along the chalk line of the orbit and see whether the tiniest sideways nudge from outgassing shows itself at all, and if it does not, we will accept that too as a kindness about size and calm, because a path that holds fast tells us as much as one that bends. We will let geometry do half the talking, phase angles changing, line of sight through the tail thickening and thinning, so that what looks like a new posture one week can be understood as a change in the angle of our chair the next, and myths about forward spears can dissolve back into the old rule that dust leans away from the sun like wheat in wind. All of that is testable without raising a voice. All of it the sort of work that gets written down in small, careful numbers that make sleep easier rather than harder. And then there are the gentler no's, the rooms we will not open this visit, at least not completely. The exact shape of the hidden heart will stay under its own weather unless the veil thins more than it likely will. The inner layers, their stitching, their voids, their seams, will remain a private book, because light does not read through stone, and our instruments are lanterns, not knives. The true birthplace of the traveller will keep its name to itself, because backtracing a path through the churn of the galaxy is like following a single flake through a snowfall years old, and even if we guess a general direction, we will not stamp a street address on the sky. The tiniest thrusts of physics that live below our ruler's patience will stay where they live, in the realm of maybes too small to matter to the plot. And as we accept those polite refusals, we will find that they do not dim the story. They make it rounder, because a good lullaby leaves a few curtains drawn. What remains, and it is plenty, is the slow unspooling of answers we can hold. How water behaves in a skin that has never seen our summers, how metals change their order as morning warms, how dust sizes blend and separate, how a small dark body can breathe for months without ever once disturbing the grand curve that carries it through our light and back into the dark. And while we wait for each of these to speak in their own time, we do the simplest, oldest thing. Keep the appointments the sky offers, look when looking is possible, listen when looking is not. Write soft numbers in tidy columns, and let tomorrow's inch of knowledge arrive at the pace comets prefer, which is the pace of sleep, the pace of tides, the pace of something ancient taking its turn to be understood, and then to leave, leaving behind a trail of proofs so gentle you might miss them if you tried to rush. Proofs that say we asked the right questions for this night, and left the rest for the night after. And in that rhythm the mind can rest, because it knows what comes next and what does not, and it knows that both are part of the same kind promise the universe keeps when we listen without demanding. The knowables will come, the unknowables will wait, and we will be here, breathing with the comet, hearing the answers arrive like small waves folding on a quiet shore. There is a kind of steadiness that only people can give to a sky full of moving things, and it begins in rooms with unremarkable furniture and remarkable patience, where coffee cools beside keyboards, and a red light near the door reminds everyone to protect their eyes. Here the language of no threat is not a charm, it is a craft, built from measurements that are checked twice, and spoken once, and if you follow that language from desk to desk, you can feel your shoulders loosen because the cadence never changes, even when the object is new. A night watch notes 4 positions and sends them on. A day watch fits a curve and trims its error bars. A duty scientist at a small agency drafts a sentence that means exactly what it says. Closest approach is far, the arc is open, the planet is safe. And that sentence moves like a quiet procession through places with names that sound like door plates on old libraries, minor planet center and horizons and circulars and bulletins, where nobody shouts because the math is already doing the talking. At the larger windows of the world, the tone stays the same. Observatories publish images that keep their brightness low and their captions precise. A mission office posts 3 paragraphs that begin with what is known and end with what is next. A space agency answers the same worried question for the 5th time that week with the same unruffled words. And if you listen for long enough, you can hear the grammar of care, the the way certainty is bounded and speculation is labelled, the way a date is given instead of a tease, the way the word safe is allowed to be ordinary rather than triumphant, because in this house the aim is not to win an argument with fear, the aim is to put fear to bed with facts that are soft enough to rest on. It helps to remember that most of the people holding these facts also go outside at night and look up and feel the child spark you feel, and it is their private joy that makes their public calm possible, because they will wait for a better night rather than frame a noisy picture. They will decline a microphone rather than give a number they have not checked. They will tell a story in the gentlest tense, present, not future, so that we can fall asleep to what is rather than bounce awake at what-ifs. Even the checklists are lullabies when you read them aloud, the same steps in the same order, the orbit fit, the uncertainty, window, the close approach screen, the visibility run, the call for follow-up, the thank you to the amateur who added a useful point from a backyard at 2 a.m, the warm line at the end that says there will be more updates when the geometry improves, and then there are the internal habits that never make it to a press release, but hold the tone just as firmly. The habit of writing down the unexciting nights, the habit of letting a null result be a result, the habit of letting a junior observer sign the note because they did the work, the habit of starting every scary-looking plot with the scale marked clearly so that the scariness melts at once. When a traveller like 3i Atlas appears, the whole machine hums in this key, and the hum is healing, because it reminds us that wonder does not need panic to feel large, and that caution is not the same as alarm, and that a comet can be allowed to be a comet even when it comes from another star. If you trace the path of the message "no risk," you will see that it never walks alone. It keeps company with "here is the date of perihelion," "here is the distance at closest approach," "here is how to see it if your sky is dark." And that companionship is the heart of good nightside communication. Because the mind that is given something true to hold does not go hunting for noise, and on the quieter edges of the map there are classrooms and planetariums and podcasts and small streams watched by 10 people who like the host's voice, all repeating the same kindness, safe, far, fleeting, beautiful, and turning it into bedtime music for thousands who will never read a circular. Even error has manners here, because when a line is corrected, it is corrected plainly and then left alone. And the correction is not a confession of weakness, but a sign that the house is tended, and the tending is what makes it possible to breathe evenly while the headlines move on. You might think that this calm would smother awe, but it does the opposite. It keeps awe clean, because now when the metals change order in the spectrum, or the tail shows a new faint braid, or the light curve rocks with a different period, the news can be small and still be sweet. Nobody has to inflate it. Nobody has to pretend it means more than it means. And in that clear air, the real marvels look exactly the size they are, which is to say, large enough to dream on. It is important too that the word interstellar is pronounced with the same gentleness as the word harmless, because it belongs in the same sentence, and that sentence is the lullaby we keep returning to. The object is from beyond our sun's family, and still it keeps to a path that is courteous to Earth. The object is ancient, and still it behaves in ways that fit the old rules of light and dust. The object is news, and still it gives us the gift of sleeping through the night. If you've ever stood in a hospital at 3 a.m. and watched a nurse check a monitor, and then step out softly so as not to wake anyone, you know the feeling this chapter is trying to hand you, because those rooms and these rooms are joined by the same vow, to keep the pulse steady, to let the hours pass without injury, to let people dream while the work goes on. That is why the phrase "no threat" is not just a line in a briefing for those of us who like to be soothed. It is the expression of a system that values precision over spectacle, and that is why we can trust it enough to set it under our pillow. The comet will come and the comet will go, and along the way the human part will keep doing what it is designed to do, counting quietly, speaking clearly, preferring the plain image to the provocative one, holding the door for curiosity and closing it gently on fear. And when the traveller is finally past the sun and past the season of easier seeing, the same people will wrap their work in tidy packages of data and set them where future hands can find them, so that someone who has not been born yet can do a recovery of our time and say thank you. In the end, that is the highest kindness the institutions can offer to a world that falls asleep with the sky in its head. A reliable voice, a small lamp, a room where the words "will know more after the conjunction" are not a stall but a promise, and a practice of wonder that never asks the heart to quicken when it does not have to, so that each of us can lie down and breathe with the comet and with the people watching it, and dream in the confidence that the next morning will bring what mornings always bring in this house. Another measured line, another courteous answer, another reason to love the dark. There is a way to be part of the sky without chasing it, a way to listen from your own window or rooftop or small patch of yard, and it begins with turning down the lights and letting your eyes remember what dark feels like. You do not need a dome or a mountain, you need 15 quiet minutes for your pupils to open and a kindness toward your own pace. And if you have binoculars, even the humblest pair, bring them like you would bring a blanket to a porch, not because they will turn the night into a movie, but because they will make a dim smudge feel a little more like a place. Stand where no street lamp strikes your eyes. Shield the screen on your phone with a red filter or a cloth so the glow cannot shout, and if a map will help you, use the simplest one you can, a small planetarium map or a printed chart with the stars like seed pearls, not so that you can master the heavens, but so that you can be shown where to look without hurry. The comet will never blaze like a lantern. It will be a whisper, a faint puff that seems to deepen if you avert your gaze a little and let the side of your eye do the work, a trick called averted vision that turns seeing into almost seeing and then into surety. And this is how listening works out here, by letting certainty arrive slowly and then letting it stay. If you live where the horizon is cluttered with roofs and wires, do not make a project of escape, make a ritual of patience. The comet climbs and sets on its own calendar, and there will be nights when a tree guards it, and nights when the tree steps aside, and both nights are part of the same conversation. Some evenings you will stand a few minutes and find nothing and feel oddly soothed anyway, because you kept an appointment with something that owes you nothing, and other evenings the air will steady and the faint patch will make itself known, and you will find that the small ache in your day eases at once, not because you discovered anything rare, but because you allowed yourself to belong. If a camera is your listening cup, keep it simple and kind, a tripod to steady your hand, a lens that can open wide, an exposure that lasts only a few heartbeats, then another, and later you can stack them the way a baker stacks thin cakes into a torta, all the layers becoming one sweetness, the speck that was not obvious in any single frame rising from the pile as if called by name. Do not worry about settings tonight. Worry about breathing, about not jabbing the shutter but touching it as if it were a sleeping child's shoulder. And if you do not own a remote trigger, use the camera's timer so your fingers can be clumsy without consequence. And if the stars trail a little, let them. Because this is not a contest and the comet does not mind being painted with soft strokes. A notebook helps, even if all you write is the date, the hour, the weather, and a sentence about mood. Because a comet is a lesson in small changes and a notebook is how small changes are allowed to matter. Write that the sky was hazy and orange near the city. Write that the wind made the tripod a little wild. Write that the neighbour's porch light flickered and then died, and the Milky Way came forward a step. Write that you thought you saw the fuzz, and then did see it, and then lost it, and then found it again, and if you keep these friend-level notes for a week or a month, you will own a light curve made of feelings. And if you keep them longer, you may find that the line you draw in ink is not so different from the lines observers draw in numbers, rising into perihelion and easing afterward. Your hours are quiet translation of what instruments call flux. Some nights you will listen with your ears, because the street is quiet and the leaves have stopped talking, and there is a hush that belongs to comets. A hush that makes you realise how many of the day's sounds were your own thoughts tapping on the glass. And when that hush arrives, the sky's closer even if the comet is not. And that closeness is why people have stood outside and looked up since before we had names for anything. Not for news, not for proof, only for companionship. If you have children or old friends or someone who is learning to trust the dark again, bring them to the window and do not make a teaching of it. Make a listening of it. Point where the app points. Show them how averted vision softens the stare into attention. Tell them what you are looking for and then stop talking. Because talking is a kind of glare, and if the comet does not reveal itself, let that be the lesson. That some nights are for practice and some for reward, and both are worth the shoes. If you are alone, do not pretend you are not in company, because the sky has more participants than you can count. Amateurs and professionals and people who would not call themselves either, all stepping out into the air with the same small hopes and the same small tools. And when you whisper that you think you see it, there are others whispering the same sentence in other languages, and together those whispers make a fabric that holds. On mornings after conjunction, when the comet begins to slip back out from the sun's glare, and the news feeds post a photo or two, do not let the pictures replace your own ritual. Let them be invitations and go back out even if you think the view will be poor, because poor is a word for tall expectations and comets favour shorter ones. On the coldest nights you will do better than you expect. On the warmest nights worse, and all the while your eyes will learn their old skill again, the one libraries ask of readers. The quiet act of following something that is almost not there until it is unquestionably there. You can also listen when you cannot go outside at all. Draw the curtains and set the phone to night mode and find a live feed from a small telescope somewhere else. Any of the streams that hum without commentary, and treat it the way you would treat a radio, not as a show to watch but as a room to sit in. Putting dishes away while the tail drifts, answering an email while the guiding star holds the field steady. Letting the sound of faint cooling fans become the white noise that gives your thoughts permission to slow. And if the feed stumbles and the stars smear for a moment, smile, because that stutter is the signature of weather and machines and people doing this work for the love of it. And love is what you are tuning to anyway. If you find yourself wanting to tell someone what you saw, do it gently. Say that you stood outside and let your eyes learn again. Say that the comet was faint and honest. Say that you felt calmed by the act of not forcing anything, and if they ask where to look, send them a note with times and a compass direction and nothing else. No pressure, no promise. Only the same invitation the sky extended to you. If they go out and see nothing, tell them that nothing is part of it too, and that nothing is not empty if it was shared. And when the season turns and the comet grows quiet and the smudge becomes a rumour and then a memory, do not think the listening is over. The practice you kept can now be used for constellations and bright nebulae and the backs of your own eyelids, where images float while you fall, asleep, and the notebook that began as a log of dates and clouds can become a place for the small proofs that knit a year together. The first frost, the first cricket, the night the power went out and the block met itself, the time you told someone about a comet and they heard your voice change and decided to step outside and listen too. You do not need to master the sky to belong to it. You need only to make a little room for it and to be mild with your expectations, and then a visitor from another star can move through your life the way a kind guest moves through a house, leaving nothing disturbed and everything somehow better. A trace of cold on the doorknob, a clean circle on the table where a glass of water stood, a feeling that you were, for a few weeks, exactly where you should be at the hour you chose, looking into the dark and letting the dark look back until both of you understood the other's quiet. There is a sweetness in departures that do not hurry, and that is the sweetness Three-Eye Atlas offers now, the slow loosening of a knot the night tied months ago, the way the bright thread of attention thins into a strand and then into a hair you can feel between finger and thumb. What rose toward perihelion has tipped past its warmest room, and everything we learned on the way in now speaks in a softer voice on the way out. The water's echo easing, the dust letting go of its boldness, the metals trading places more gently, the tail keeping its posture even as it grows more translucent, a pale ribbon still pointed away from the sun like wheat in wind, only now the field is farther and the breeze is kinder. Imagine you're packing after a long visit with someone you love, the clock not pressing, the suitcase open on the bed, the shirt you meant to wear one more time folded with care instead, the glass rinsed and set upside down to dry, the chair pushed back from the window but not all the way under the desk. That is the rhythm of the comet now. Not a vanishing, but a tidying. Not a flourish, but the small courtesies of goodbye. And the sky, which didn't rush the hello, does not rush this either. It lets the coma grow thin like the last fog over a lake. It lets the tail blur its edges until distance takes over, and the fan becomes a suggestion more than a shape. The orbit never faltered. The chalk line never forgot itself, and if you trace it with your tired eyes, you will feel how the open curve has always been a farewell written in advance, the kind that is easier to carry because it was never a surprise. This is the part of the story where memories begin to settle into categories without your help. The first night you spoke the name out loud and liked the way it sounded in your mouth. The morning you read that Water's Child had been heard in ultraviolet while the sun was still far, and you understood that breath can be counted without being seen. The evening you tried averted vision, and the smudge became a place. The small grin you felt when nickel stepped forward before iron, not because metals make your heart beat faster, but because order and surprise can share a room. The hour live feed stuttered and then steadied, and you realised there were people half a world away tending this light for you, for us, asking nothing back. The day solar conjunction shut the door and you accepted the pause. The night after, when the door opened and everything that had been promised arrived without fanfare. And now, as the comet withdraws, the way the numbers keep their pledge by shrinking in the same pattern they grew, lines on plots lowering like a tide you can set your watch to, the kindest form of science because it lets you rest while it works. The nucleus, always shy, is shyer still, wrapped in its own weather, a small dark almond retreating into cold that suits it better than our lamp ever did. If you listen closely, you can hear how many times we used metaphors of breath, of fountains, of fog, and that tells you the deepest thing we learned might not be about water or dust, but about pace, that the universe conducts most of its business at a speed the body can understand if we let it, that patience is not a virtue in this house so much as a doorway, and you walked through it. When a visitor like this leaves, the best thing to do is not to clutch, but to accompany, to walk to the gate and wave and stand there a moment longer after they have turned the corner, to let the space they occupied remain empty long enough for gratitude to fill it. Gratitude for the rooms that were lit just enough at just the right times. Gratitude for the people who kept the lamps trimmed and the notes careful. Gratitude for your own willingness to go outside and be taught by a faint thing that had no idea you existed and yet altered your night anyway. The long goodbye is not sad because it is long. It is gentle because it is honest, because nothing here promised to stay, because from the first frames to the last it was clear this was a once-only bow, a polite curve past the sun, and then the long dark road out. And the grace of that is that you were invited to witness something that did not belong to you, and you did so without trying to keep it, which is what adulthood looks like when the classroom is the sky. If you want a final image to carry, let it be small. A speck in a dome's field, a number added to a column, a whisper read in a line too narrow for your eyes to see, a note in a notebook about wind and cloud and a neighbour's light turning off at last, the hiss of a kettle in a distant kitchen while a spectrum prints itself, the feeling of a lens cap in your pocket you nearly forget to replace, a breath taken in and let out with intention because you remembered that comets breathe too, just slower, just colder. And beyond these, picture the dark it returns to. Not empty, not silent, rich with other seeds and shards and almonds wrapped in their own weather, each with a history you will not read, each on a path that will never learn your name, and find comfort in that scale, because it turns worry into wonder and leaves you smaller in a way that is good for sleep. The long goodbye is a teaching about how to keep company with things that pass. You show up, you listen, you measure if measuring is your way, you thank, you wave, you go back inside, you leave the lamp near the door for whoever comes next. What remains is simple and soft, a line that never closed, a small dark heart wrapped in its own weather, water heard early in the cold, metals that cleared their throat in a new order, a tale that kept its promise, always away from the sun. Dates that came and went without alarm, warmth near late October, a distant courteous hello in December. And all along the human part, quiet rooms, careful notes, the same steady sentence, safe, far, wondrous. 3i Atlas did not ask for panic. It asked for patience. It taught us how to listen in colours our eyes can't keep, how to weigh dust by light, how to let small changes add up to meaning. It showed that interstellar does not mean spectacle. It means a different nursery, a different accent, still singing physics we know. Carry the cadence it left behind. Approach, learn, warm, learn, recede, remember. Keep the small practices, averted vision, dark adapted eyes, a calm breath, a line in a notebook. Let the faint thing be enough. Now the visitor is slipping back into the long, kind dark. The proofs stay with us, in tidy columns, quiet graphs, and the new muscle memory behind your eyes. I can find a whisper. Leave a lamp by the door for whatever comes next. Set your thoughts down like dust in a tale. Breathe. The night will keep watch. The universe will keep time. And you, who listened well, can drift.